Shop the Sherwin-Williams July Summer Sale and get 30% off paints and stains July 18th through the 28th. With prices starting at $34.29, it's the perfect time to transform your space with color. Whether you're looking to revamp your interior or exterior, we have you covered with bold hues, soothing neutrals, and everything in between. Visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store or shop the sale online. Delivery available on qualifying orders. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details.
Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Logger Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Logger Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good! Oh, yeah?
Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Logger Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
Welcome in to another new episode of The Logger Line, as always served to you, courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Carbach Brewing. I'm Ben Dubose, your host, again joined by Paolo Alves. We had taken a little bit of a brief holiday hiatus, if you will, over the past couple of weeks. Happy New Year to all of you listening, by the way. But we're back now, and there's a lot to catch up on as the Rockets enter the first few days of January 2025. So, since we last spoke, the Rockets have gone 5-2, and overall, that's pretty good. You shouldn't complain about that in any 7-game stretch on the NBA calendar. They enter this weekend at 22-11, number 3 in a deep Western Conference, and they've got a couple of high-profile home games coming up against the Celtics and the Lakers. That said, the process in which they got to 5-2 was definitely a bit uneven, and so we'll get into that on today's show. They went 4-0 against the weaker portion of the schedule, 4 games against the Pelicans twice, the Raptors, the Hornets. We talked about that being a real opportunity coming out of the NBA Cup and a tougher stretch to open December, and kudos to the Rockets for taking advantage of that. But then they also lost back-to-back home games against the Timberwolves and the Heat, both with double-digit leads in the second half, and both of those really showcase what I think we both know is the clear flaw of this team. It's the offensive side of the ball, and specifically, where do they turn when things get sticky in the half court late in close games against good defenses? The Timberwolves went on a 15-2 run to close it out, and then Miami 2 nights later had basically a 17-2 run that closed out that game as well. Rockets added a few points in garbage time to massage the final score. But the silver lining, at least this week, is that New Year's Day matchup against Dallas, which the Rockets did win, and perhaps the biggest variable that got them over the finish line in that one was someone that we weren't even talking about when we last had a pod 2 weeks ago, and that's Cam Whitmore. Over these last 7 games, since coming back from the G League, Cam has had 3 really big games, one in Toronto, one in New Orleans, where he went for a career-high 27, and then the one against the Mavs, where he scored 18 points in the first 17 minutes, helped the Rockets overcome what was a double-digit deficit in the first half, and then post-game, Ime Udoka had some strong praise for Cam's defense as well. So in the spirit of New Year's Day and the new calendar year of 2025, I want this show to list some resolutions for the Rockets in the new year, and I'll start with what I think is already happening. They've got to play Cam Whitmore. And right now, it's actually pretty easy for them to do that, because probably the lowest point of the last couple of weeks, Tari Eason has not played in the last 7 games for the Rockets with leg soreness. It's the same area and his surgically repaired lower left leg, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more as we move our way through today's pod. And in addition to not having Tari, Amen Thompson still has one more game left on his suspension for tossing Tyler Hero around like a rag doll the other night. But even when you get Amen and Tari back, I think there's still a pretty clear path to get Cam 15 minutes or so per game, simply by giving him the minutes that were initially going to Reed Shepherd to start the year, then to Aaron Holiday in recent weeks. Because it's not like you really need a so-called point guard in that spot. You've got Ime Udoka basically staggering Fred VanVleet and Jalen Green as the lead guard for 48 minutes. And we know Amen Thompson, when he plays, and he's only got one more game on his suspension, he's got some ball handling point guard abilities as well. And then there's certainly going to be some games where Cam deserves more than 15 minutes, but it's just way easier to go from 15 to 30 minutes than it is to go from 0 to 15. Because if his play warrants it, just like we saw the other night against the Mavs, it's not hard to put him in the closing lineup in place of someone else. Against Dallas, it was in place of Jabari. And so I think when you look at the bigger picture of this team, we know what the flaws are offensively. And so for someone like Cam Whitmore, again, it's not easy to go from 0 to 15 if he's not playing at all. There are some stylistic changes that you have to incorporate to have him on the floor and to maximize his skill set, unique blend of athleticism, length, and power. But if he's on the court for 15, 20 minutes and he's playing well, it's not that hard to go from 30 to 35. And there are some games where you need it because this team can be offensively challenged. They need to just have someone that can get out in transition or make some tough shots by elevating over guys from the mid-range, from three. We know he started the year slow on threes. That's come around of late. And so I think this is just an easy decision for Ime Udoka to keep Cam Whitmore in the rotation, even when Amen Thompson and Tari Eason, knock on wood, are back. It's not that Cam is a perfect player. He's just 20 years old. We know what they wanted him to work on in the G League. He's got to make quicker decisions, needs to be more aware off the ball defensively, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, he's a bucket getter, and that's what this team desperately needs at times, especially with a defense that's already elite. It doesn't take much offensively for this team to compete with almost anyone, and Cam Whitmore, for really the second half of the year, could be the guy that gets them over that hump. And at just 20 years old and already one of the best athletes, in my opinion, in the entire NBA, he should only get better. And so that's my first New Year's resolution here. They've got to play Cam. I understand why they didn't initially. He came out cold from three-point range. They were high on Reed Shepherd after Summer League in the preseason. Tari was coming back from injury. This is an abnormally deep team. I get it. But at this point, it's just pretty clear to me that Cam is more ready for real NBA games than Reed, and he's got a lot more upside than Aaron Holiday. So with that in mind, I think keeping Cam in the rotation is clearly the play. Paolo, are we in agreement on that?
Yeah, but I did kind of want to. It's not necessarily a different perspective, right? Because I do think that they have to play Cam more. I think he's played well enough to warrant it. I think that, especially defensively, he's been more aware, especially in the last game. But I'll just add a couple of extra angles to do with what you just said about it being a New Year's a New Year's resolution. Forgive me. On a team that relies so much on its defensive intensity, right? It's mostly not about your ability to play defense. It's mostly about your awareness and your commitment, because it's really hard to convince, guys 1 through 9 in the rotation to give it their all every single minute that they're out there on the floor. If there's one person, because on defense, you only need one person to make a grave mistake or to not be paying attention for it to fall apart, right? And so it kind of builds on itself. The way the Rockets play defense builds on itself. There's effort every single possession, and you reap the rewards of that, and that feeds the players, and it makes them show that effort possession after possession after possession. If there's the defense falls apart and you give up an easy bucket, that can very easily compile, and that's how you get those stretches where sometimes it feels like the other team's just scoring at will, right? That's the biggest difference between, especially because when you look at the Rockets individually, right, we obviously have a man in Tari who are insane defenders. Dylan Brooks is a really good defender. Jabari has improved, but it looks better because of what I'm saying. Fred VanVleet has declined, but defense still works. Defense still works with anyone who's improved, but some of that improvement is because of where I was talking about. Jabari Smith has improved, but he's not an elite defender. Jalen Green is not an elite defender. Fred VanVleet's not an elite defender anymore. Why does it work? It works because of what I just said. And so it's extra punishing for a team like the Rockets to play someone, which is the case with Cam at times. Wasn't last game, but is sometimes, that can fall asleep defensively because you're punishing the morale of the entire team because of it. And when so much of your identity is tied to the insane levels of effort that the Rockets put in every single night, that's especially punishing. And that's, sometimes that's going to weigh in too heavily compared to what the expectation is for someone to get minutes. Because Cam is a breath of fresh air offensively in the sense of the way he puts the ball in the basket and having the and I guess I'll get on top of it and say I really like Cam Whitmore. I think he can be a Jaylen Brown type prospect. I think he's insane athletically. I think he tries, but I think he has that a little bit of that swag and that moxie about him, where that all the great scorers have. Obviously, needs to walk in defensively. The tools are all there as well. He can stay in front of guys. He can help weak side. He's strong. Like, he's not gonna get bullied. He's a good rebounder. Like, there's a lot to work with there. So just I don't want this to come off as too negative about Cam, because I do agree with you. It's definitely one of the guys that needs to be getting more playing time. But I wanted to kind of hedge a little bit and say some of the stuff that people aren't saying, because Cam's young, like really young, and this team has a real lack for what Cam's bringing us. And we all know, we've been around long enough to know how fandom is on Twitter and on social media. It's very easy. If a guy's young and a guy's playing well, it goes from 0 to 100 really, really quickly. And so that's why I wanted to kind of temper a little bit of what the discussion has been, because there's a lot of people out there that you guys have heard enough people saying that Cam Whitmore should be playing, even people saying he should start in place of Jalen Green, right? So I just wanted to, even offensively, and I'll give a shout out on this as well. There's a great tweet and a great thread of a discussion between Rahat at Red94 on Twitter. Everybody knows about him, and someone who's up and coming, but a lot of people haven't, noticed that he's, hit, I guess, been a great voice for discussion on Rockets Twitter. I'm talking about DeAndre Williams at Williams on Twitter. That's Will with 3 L's UMZ. He's one of the guys that does the Right Read podcast, which you guys can go and check out as well. Just one of one of the best up and coming accounts on Twitter. He's been that way for a year, and he was having this discussion with Red94 on Twitter, and he brought up some stats, and he's not he knows how to interpret stats, but he's not a stat nerd. So he'll look at the film, he'll go through play by play. If you follow him on Twitter, you'll see he does all of the homework, right? And he brought up that he compared rookie Jalen Green and Cam Whitmore this season, including when he was playing in the G League, which obviously will inflate the stats. But even then, even with that inflation coming from his play against a weaker comp in the G League, on spot ups, Jalen Green's been better. On ISOs, Jalen Green is way better. He's Cam Whitmore. I guess I'll go to get to the conclusions after I list the stats. On jumpers, Jalen Green's better. On assist percentage, Jalen Green's way better as well. This to say what? This to say that offensively, we see that Cam's production is, a lot of points put up on the board, right? But don't confuse that with the ability to generate shots.
He's a play finisher, not a play creator.
Exactly.
I think that's what you're saying.
Exactly. So, and Jalen Green at this point, even though we wish he would be a better play finisher, he's a way better way better shot creator for himself and for others, even though that's not necessarily strong. So it's just that Cam Whitmore literally has, I think, the worst assist percentage in the league for his position, for the minutes that he plays. Even if you adjust for in a per possession basis, it's really terrible. He's also one of the worst shooters off the dribble, or in unassisted attempts as well. Right. So this to say, let's not confuse the fact that he's been good offensively, because he gets putbacks, he runs in transition, he gets spot opportunities, which he has been making. That's all well and good. I just wanted to provide a little bit of the nuance that, yes, Cam's exciting, and Cam is going to be a great player, in my opinion. He's still a 20-year-old sophomore, and even though Jalen Green's not been having the best season, and when we've talked about that ad nauseum on this podcast, I'm pushing it too far the other way. What I'm going to say is a hot take, but he's not close to what Jalen is. And he's not close to providing what Jalen provides, even though Jalen has been very deficient in what he's been providing. It's just, if you don't have Jalen out there, if you replace Jalen with Cam Whitmore, you'd lose a lot of the shot creation for himself and for others. You'd lose a lot of the ball handling ability, because other than Fred VanVleet, there's nobody on this team that can do it. I mean, Amen Thompson can do it as well, just not as safe with the ball in a sense. And we're a team that relies very heavily upon not turning the ball over. It's another turnovers are once again contribute the same as defensive breakdowns, because it's very exasperating for someone who's putting all that effort on defense to go on offense and instantly turn the ball over and give up 2 points on the other end. So those are especially important. And so I'm not even saying that Cam Whitmore won't be a better player than Jalen Green by this time next season. I'm saying for what the context of this team is, and I've been going on for a long time, I apologize for the long rant. I'm just saying we can be somewhere in the middle where, yes, Cam Whitmore is really exciting. Yes, Cam Whitmore deserves more playing time. Give him 20 minutes a game. If he's hot, give him 25. Give him 30 minutes a game. If he's playing really well and you feel like you don't necessarily need the nuanced differences between him and Jalen, you don't necessarily need what Jalen's bringing you, you can even take the minutes away from Jalen in certain circumstances. Not saying that there's anything wrong about that. The radical, let's switch his role with Jalen, let's start him at the 2 and stuff like that, like that's out of control. That's unfair expectations for Cam, and it's not good basketball discussion, and it's setting him up for failure, which is, listen, we are in a situation, because we are good, where we can bring these guys along slowly and them not having to deal with the same problems that all the guys in the Steamer Silas era dealt with. So let's continue doing that. It's been paying dividends with Cam. It's been, he's been playing a lot better recently, so much so that he makes me reconsider a little bit of what I was willing to give up for a guy like De'Aaron Fox, which we'll talk about later, because he's showed so much more. And because he was mostly viewed as kind of a throw in those packages, he's changed and he has improved a lot, and he has changed the calculus on a lot of things that we'll talk about as we go forward on this in the next spots. That's all there. Let's not go overboard. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, trade deadline a little over a month away, February 6th. So we're getting close. We'll definitely talk about that more as we make our way through today's pod, and then in the weeks ahead leading up to that. We'll see what opportunities are or are not there for Rafael Stone and the Rockets. I just think so much of the Cam versus Jalen debate is misguided because, I mean, for starters, those two have a great chemistry together. Jalen has talked about it in the past, wanting to play with more elite athletes like Cam Whitmore, like Amen Thompson. I think the idea, and we've seen at times this playing out on the floor, is that when there's more pressure on the rim beyond Jalen, when he's not the only guy who can really collapse the defense and get those paint touches, so to speak, then it gives him a lot more room with which to operate. And so when you see the way those two play together, you can see the joy they have, the chemistry. We don't need to do this comparison, especially when Cam has enough length, enough power, enough versatility to play a number of different roles. Again, against the Mavs, he was playing in place of Jabari Smith Jr. So it's not just about Cam operating as a shooting guard. No, he's a play finisher who has the height, the length, the athleticism to play in a lot of different roles. And this is a Rockets starting lineup and oftentimes closing lineup that, other than Alper and Şengün, doesn't have a consistent scorer. I mean, we can break it down into creation versus finishing, but the bottom line is, can you put the ball in the bucket enough to avoid these prolonged droughts like we saw 15-2, 17-2 in the fourth quarters against the Timberwolves and the Heat? Good defenses in the half court. And there's a lot of different ways that you can use Cam Whitmore, especially at such a young stage in his career, to achieve the same goal. It doesn't need to be a one-for-one comparison with Jalen Green or anyone else. It's about simply having Cam Whitmore in the rotation to where it's not a massive stylistic shift. He's available, and then if he plays well in those 10 to 15 minutes that you give him, then you have that as an option going down the stretch in the fourth quarter if it's a game where things are getting sticky and you need to, diversify your attack. To your points on Cam's defense, they're certainly fair as young as he is and with the weaknesses he's shown to this point. However, beyond just the usual, growth of young prospects, they get better in year 2 compared to year 1. I think there's a couple of other things that are important to keep in mind with him. This year, I think there are fewer weak links in the chain. And so when it comes to stuff like off-ball awareness, I think being the guy who stands out is oftentimes one of the most powerful incentives or motivating factors for younger players. And even last year, the Rockets were a good defense. They weren't really a great defense. They hovered around 6, 7, 8 most of the year. This year, they've been at 2 pretty much the entire season. Only Oklahoma City has been better. This is a truly elite defense. We've seen even the weaker defenders like Jalen Green, like Alperen Şengün, take a step forward. And so if Cam Whitmore is potentially the only guy who is not holding up his end of the bargain, if he's the only weak link in the chain, then it's not just letting down the coaching staff, it's letting down the other 4 guys that you're playing with. That can be a very powerful motivating force for young players to not want to let your teammates down. And even compared to rookie year Cam Whitmore when he was 19, I also think the surrounding construct of this roster, the fact that they're even better defensively overall, I think that makes him more likely to do the little things, to stay committed, to stay bought in. And the other point that I would raise with Cam, because of his length, he's a low-key, really good rebounder when used in the right ways. We saw him get a couple of those against the Mavs. And for a team that really prioritizes being the best or close to the best rebounding team in the NBA as a big part of its defensive formula and not giving up too many second chance points, then having a guy with the length, the hops of Cam with a group that oftentimes, especially the starting group, isn't super bouncy when you look at guys like Fred, like Dylan, like Jabari, even Şengün to some extent, then having an elite athlete like Cam that's versatile enough to box out some of the longer, rangier wings, lots of different positions. His ability as a rebounder can help you a little bit on the defensive end of the floor as well, simply by preventing second and third opportunities. So all in all, I think he's going to get more looks. I don't think it's a guarantee that he's necessarily going to play more than, say, 15 minutes per night. But if he plays 15 minutes per night, that's enough to leave the door open to get from 15 to 25 or 30 if his play on a given night warrants it. Again, it's so much easier to go from 15 to 30 than it is from 0 to 15. I think we're at a point now where we've established the baseline somewhere in the, let's say, 12 to 18 range. And then if his play warrants it, it can be scaled up on a given night. Before we move on from Cam to talk about other topics, I want to address the elephant in the room, which is the awkward post-game interview that he gave after the Dallas game. That's been making the rounds. You talked about the back and forth that Rahat and Will had on Twitter on Thursday. That was one of the things that showed up at the top of my feed. One of the others that I saw discussed in a number of different ways was reaction to the 2 minutes of, let's just call it awkwardness that Cam gave after his great game against the Mavs, basically saying he doesn't know if he's done enough to get a consistent role. And I think I understand where the concern comes from. And as someone that's in the media, I'll admit it was one of the more awkward interviews that I've seen. But I also think, at least at this stage, some of the concern is premature. And I want to explain why, both as a fan of this team, but also someone that is involved in media coverage of the Rockets and understands the context a little bit more and how these interviews take place in locker rooms and, how that sort of correlates with the way players interact and don't interact with their teammates on a daily basis. I think it's important not to punish players for honesty. And I think that's something that Ime Udoka believes wholeheartedly. Ime was asked about it in an interview he had on Thursday with Matt Thomas on Sports Talk 790. And he basically said, I have no problem with it. I am not a sensitive guy. I want my guys to be able to express themselves. And for the concern that's out there about, is he going to be frustrated or bitter? Is this going to impact who he is in the locker room, how he is with his coaches, his teammates? I think even if he didn't articulate it to the media in that way, what you're worried about is the underlying emotion. It's not so much just 2 minutes on New Year's night, January 1st, that may or may not stay with him. You could even argue that maybe it's good for him to get it off his chest and now he can move on. I think if you actually listen to that interview in its entirety, it's worth noting that when he's asked about things that I would consider micro, someone asked him about his improved defense, which Ime talked about post-game. Someone asked him about the energy and spark he brought off the bench, helping the Rockets overcome what I think was an 11-point deficit in the first half and flip it to, I think, a 9-point lead at halftime. He answered those normally, and he had some insightful observations. The only times it got awkward were when reporters were asking him to tie it into the macro. Basically, do you think this proves something to the coaching staff to give you a more consistent role? Have you learned what they wanted you to learn in the G League? I think there's some bitterness and frustration there for sure, but I think that's to be expected. We've talked about it going back to the offseason. It's hard for a guy who's just 20 years old, and at 19 last year, as raw as he was still an impactful player as a rookie for a competent Rockets team that went 41-41 in a tough West and had that long winning streak in March. Cam was a big part of that. And so to go from the highs of that in year one at 19 years old, and all of these guys, if you're one of the top 1% at your profession in the world, and you're this good, this young, of course you're really confident. It is a bitter pill to swallow to go back to what is effectively the minor leagues in year two, all for the sake of, let's be honest, the guy who basically bumped Cam from the rotation was Reed Shepherd, a guy who has not proven it at the NBA level at all and was basically a sixth man in college last year. It's a lot to ask, and then I don't care if he says it to the media or not, you are kidding yourself if you don't think that it's difficult for him. And, you know, it's not like last night was out of left field. There have been other interviews. He had a shoot around a few days ago where someone asked him a question about, it was basically the same theme of, do you think you're showing something to the coaches to continue getting run? And his response was, and he did that one with a smile, I thought I had done that already. Against or after the Mavs game, there weren't the smiles. It was a little more awkward. It was a little more raw. But I also think there was a little more understandable frustration because it felt like to me that was proof of concept. That was validation of what Cam Whitmore can be to this team. I know he also had the good games against the Raptors and the Pelicans, but I don't really count those as much, at least in terms of the broader narrative, because those were awful opponents. Also, those were road games, so there were maybe like two reporters and the interviews last like 30 seconds because there's only so many questions that will be asked when it's only two reporters, and also the Jonathan Fagan retirement tour. This was the first home game in which Cam went off against a really good team, the defending Western Conference champions, and the team, by the way, that was closest to you in the West standings are now 2.5 games back of the Rockets for the 3 seed. So the Rockets have built themselves a little bit of a cushion. To see Cam go out against a really good team like that, have a big game, how is he not going to think, especially as young as he is, whether he says it or not to the media, how is he not going to think on some level, why weren't you doing this all along? We could have been doing this from the outset of this season. That's natural. That's human nature. Think of it if in whatever job you do, Paolo, or any of our listeners, if you think you're better than someone that's ahead of you in the rotation and you get the opportunity, maybe they're out sick for a few days, and you do better than that person who's getting more prestige, getting more pay, whatever it may be, how are you not going to think to yourself, oh, I should have been doing this the whole time, if you have a good day and show how capable you are in that position? That's human nature. The point is not so much the underlying motivation, because whether he says it to the media or not, that's going to be there. The point is whether he carries it moving forward. Because, yeah, if he does act like that the whole rest of the season, and there's this residual bitterness, frustration to where he's a malcontent, and it's just not a functional work environment around his teammates, around his coaches, then okay, that would be weird. but I don't think we're anywhere near that point yet. This was one interview after a night in which it felt like it was the ultimate victory lap, the proof of concept, the validation, whatever you want to call it. The way I think this plays out is he got this off his chest and now everyone moves on. And if this continues to happen interview after interview, then sure, you can be alarmed. But I just don't think that this in and of itself, especially on a team where Ime Udoka wants these guys to be honest, again, he doesn't want these guys to be super sensitive and walking on eggshells. If he needed to express himself to maybe get it off his chest, then let him. And now we can all move on. I think that's what the Rockets are hoping for out of this. I think that's sort of what Cam was doing. And I also think the situation will naturally resolve itself because as he stays in the rotation, I think we both expect he will for the reasons we just laid out, the questions are going to be more micro anyway. The reason he's getting so many macro questions about have you proven to the Rockets is because he hasn't been a rotation fixture just yet. And there's still a little bit of a question about how exactly are things going to look when Amen comes back from the suspension and when, knock on wood, Tari comes back from his leg injury. If he stays in the rotation, then there aren't going to be these macro questions because everybody knows, okay, this is the way things are. And instead, the questions will just be about what did you do right or what did you do wrong on a given night. And so the interviews won't be the way they were after Wednesday's game, simply because the nature of the questions will change when the nature of his role changes. So that's the way I would close the loop on this whole discussion with Cam, his role, and also his attitude, because I've seen some trying to tie it in with the reasons he may have fallen in the draft in 2023 when some people thought he'd be a top 5 pick and he somehow fell to the Rockets at 20. Not saying it's a nothing burger, not saying that you can't have a raised eyebrow, but I would not overreact to one interview. I think a lot of this is just human nature. He got it off his chest. And so for now, I would focus much more on the quality of his play on the court than the awkwardness of that 2-minute interview or whatever it was in the Rockets locker room after the game. Paolo, I know you look at this from a little bit of a different lens. I look at it somewhat trying to balance the basketball considerations with also knowing the context of media interviews. And even if some guys don't say it to the media, I know that, well, they're thinking it anyway. And so in terms of how it affects them moving forward, it's all the same whether they say it outright or not. You look at it as something of an outsider. What was your take on this as far as, Cam's emotions after the game and where we go from here?
I think it's definitely not nothing, and I think it's definitely less than what people are making it out to be. I think it's, as you said, it's human nature, and I think everybody feels that at whatever they do. I mean, your job. I mean, if you do sports. I mean, listen. I remember back when we started doing this rocket stuff. Back when I first started, I felt like, listen, I'm a lot better than a lot of the people out there that get to do this for a living. And well, I put in the work, and eventually, I got more opportunities. And when I got them, and I felt like I did a good job, I would boast about it as well. It's especially so for athletes. Listen, these are probably the most competitive people in the world. This is the 1% of the 1% of the 1% of what the basketball player is, right? And so if these guys were not competitive, especially playing for Ime Udoka, then something would be tremendously wrong. But at the same time, I will say it wasn't the happiest of comments, right? Or I guess, it isn't something that I like listening to, but it's something that you can understand when you look at even the way Cam plays. He plays with a certain edge, right? And we can't have it both ways. You can't want players to have that type of edge and have that type of motivation and have that kind of lack of fear of the moment, and at the same time want them to be robots in every single other facet of what being an athlete is. But what I wanted to highlight most of all is that this little incident of sorts also highlighted something that's even more important than that, which is it is very clear where the authority lies within this locker room, and it's with Ime Udoka. Ime Udoka was asked about it. He didn't dodge the question. He didn't try to kind of gloss over it or even outright defend Whitmore or outright condemn it. No, Ime Udoka was what a leader of mine is. He said, hey, we talked about it. We had talked about it. Cam knows what he needs to do. And so if he keeps doing it, he'll get more minutes. Listen, it's not, he wasn't caught off guard, right? It wasn't something, he wasn't negligent prior to the interview happening. It was something that was talked about in-house, was handled in-house. And Cam Whitmore, in the heat of the moment, let some of it slip to the outside. Is it good? It's not necessarily good, but it isn't anywhere near a disaster or anything like that. And I overall think that the fan base in general kind of took it the way that I'm kind of portraying it. So it's not a huge deal. It is, the side of it's healthy. But most important of all, I liked what it showed of how Ime Udoka exercises his leadership, and I think we have the right guy on the job as far as a head coach goes and as far as a leader for such a young team goes.
Yeah, I think this was much more about the Rockets than it was about Cam Whitmore. That was the characterization that I sort of took issue with, that, oh, is this why he fell in the draft? No, I think this is more reflective of the Rockets as a team under Ime Udoka. This is the coach who called LeBron James on his home floor in Staples Center, or whatever the hell it is now in LA, a soft-ass boy. This is a Rockets team that seems to get in a new fight every single week. The Rockets are not trying to play PR games and be very guarded in what they say for trying to step on eggshells for fear of hurting feelings around the league or hurting feelings inside the locker room. No, they express themselves. They are open. I think this is a product of that. And I'm not going to say until they win a championship that I know this is clearly the way to go, but I think a lot of people are looking at this through the norms of other teams and other structures, and that's just not what Ime Udoka is about. This is a team that plays with an edge. Cam does individually, but I think collectively it's just the culture that they bought in. And so I think they're honest, they communicate, they're transparent. And I think if you're paying attention, that's why we had these discussions, hell, on this pod going back to the offseason about the difficulty of sending Cam to the G League and why, basketball-wise was consideration, but there's a lot of other factors that have to go into it as well. Because, yeah, it is a bitter pill to swallow. As good as he is, this is a rare situation with the roster, but you can't expect a guy who's 20 years old, 19 at the end of last season, to understand the nuance of all of that. It is very rare for a player who contributed to winning as much as he did as a rookie, put up, on a per 36 basis, some of the best numbers from a rookie we've seen in a while. It's a bitter pill to swallow. I hope he's learned from it from a basketball standpoint. It looks like he has. And as far as the other sides of the game, I think I would give it a little more time before worrying too much about last night. You can sort of have a watchful eye, raised eyebrow. I get all of that, but I wouldn't worry too much about what this says about Cam and why he fell in the draft, what it means about his future, how bought is he on the organization. Again, I think a lot of this is just residual frustration from the last couple of months. He had a big game and a big moment against a very good opponent. Even without Luka, the Mavs are still a very good team. And I think that was his victory lap of sorts after what I'm sure were probably the most difficult 2 months of his professional life, given what he had proven before that stint down in the G League. So if it only happens once, I tend to think this is him just blowing off some steam. And now, we all move forward, and I fully expect that Cam will be an important part of the game plan when the Rockets play against the Celtics and the Lakers this weekend. Certainly the game against Celtics, there's no Amen Thompson, and we'll see if Tari Eason is available by the end of the weekend against the Lakers. We can hope for that. But I'll actually use that as an opportunity to transition to my second resolution, which is we need a healthy leg for Tari Eason. I think when we're talking about the same body part that cost him most of his sophomore season, and he had surgically repaired last March, and we're going into an offseason in which he will be extension eligible. And we've seen the highs. We know how good he can be. Honestly, one of the 50 or so best players in the NBA already when he is right, as he was in October and November. To see him struggling with the same injury again, it's concerning. And there's been some frustration because it feels like it appeared out of nowhere. The one criticism I would have for the Rockets, I don't think they should have labeled it injury management. I think they initially put that coming out of the NBA Cup because they didn't think it would be this long. It's been almost 3 weeks. He last played in that semifinal on December 14th. I think they were hoping that the soreness would resolve itself more quickly than it did. And at least to some degree, I think this is to be expected. The question is how much coming off of surgery. When we talk about, lower body injuries, oftentimes in the NBA, it's a multi-year recovery process. We talked about that with Steven Adams. Stevens sort of said at multiple junctures this season that he looks at it as a 2-year recovery process. And just because he's able to play this year, he's not going to be fully back until a year from now. That the first year back is still something of a recovery, and perhaps that's the case with Tari as well. But nonetheless, to see the same injury, to see him going through issues with the same body part, with the same injury for a guy as young as he is and as promising as he is in the case of Tari Eason, I get the alarm. And as soon as it was clear there was soreness, I think the Rockets should have put him on the injury report as lower left leg soreness rather than injury management. I think injury management implies that there's something strategic to it, in that, maybe they were just giving him a week off, light schedule with the end of the NBA Cup. So maybe you could easily, turn one game off into, a week to just rest up on the couch, basically. Once one game turned to 2 and 2 turned to 3, it was clear there was more to it. And so, in my opinion, it's not injury management. No, there's soreness that at this point was clearly unexpected, because he's missed 7 games, almost 3 weeks and counting. So I don't like the initial label. But other than that technicality, I don't have the frustration with the team that a lot of people on social media and Reddit seem to. I think Ime Udoka in particular, if you're listening to these press conferences, he's being open and transparent with what he knows and talking about how, they want the pain. They say it's subsided, but they want it to get to 0 before they risk him, especially at this juncture of the season in December and January. It might be different if it's the playoffs, but with such a long time to go in the grind of an 82-game season, and it's not like they've fallen off a cliff. Again, they've missed 7 games, but they are 5-2 in this stretch. They can be a little bit more conservative. So other than the initial label being a little bit misleading, I don't really have an issue with how the Rockets have handled this. The one criticism that I would have, and this is not so much of the Rockets specifically, but more just the NBA, and I would honestly say broader sports when it comes to injuries, I wish there was a way to talk, or at least hear from, trainers in a situation like this. Because, the player himself is off limits as he's recovering, and I understand that. But Ime Udoka can only say what he's told, whatever talking points he's given from the medical team. He's not a doctor. He doesn't know the particulars. And the million-dollar question here, what I think would either calm fears of the fan base or let us know that it's cause for serious concern, how much of this is to be expected coming off that March surgery? And Paolo, I don't know the answer to that. I'm not a medical person either. I don't know how much of this soreness is just normal, something that 9 months out, especially when you go back to playing at the stress of NBA regular season games, is to be expected, and how much of it is a cause for alarm that maybe the surgery didn't resolve the underlying issue in the bone. I honestly don't know, and I don't think Ime Udoka knows. Tari might know to some extent, but he's not. Well, number one, he's not available, and 2, he's not really a medical person either. The person to really ask would be Jason Biles or the training staff of the Rockets, and those guys aren't available. And to some degree, it sort of reminds me of Kyle Tucker and the Astros when people were getting frustrated with Joe Espada for all those weeks, and it turned out to be months that Kyle Tucker missed with the shin issue, which later turned out to be a fracture that they didn't know initially. Well, look, Joe Espada only knows what he's told from the training staff. He's trying to focus on putting together a lineup with whoever's available to him for that day. He doesn't really know that much other than just a very, surface level briefing that he's given from the trainers of, is Kyle available and is he going to be available in the near future if he's not available today? Beyond that, he's not an expert. He doesn't know. And I think the same is true with Tari and the Rockets here. I think Ime knows if he's going to be available that night or has some indication. And, he's got a surface level understanding of what they're trying to do. But in terms of, what's actually going on from a medical perspective, and should we be concerned or not? Is this to be expected coming off the surgery he had like last March? That's not Ime's forte. That's not in his wheelhouse. So I get the frustration from the fan base and that Tari is an incredibly important player to this team, and I want him to be healthy. That's why, hopefully this rest does it. He's had almost 3 weeks. So hopefully the rest gets his leg to where it needs to go, because when he is right, and, one of the things I worry a little bit about, if you look at his percentages, he was actually trending downward for a couple of weeks before he went out. So it's possible he was struggling with it even before going out. Now, I know he had the concussion as well, so I'm not going to say for sure it was related to the leg. The schedule stiffened up in that stretch as well. So there's other factors you can point to. But in terms of the frustration, I understand where it's coming from. I wish we know more. Even as someone in the credential media pool, I don't know as much as I would like, but I don't think it's necessarily the Rockets' fault. I certainly don't think it's Ime Udoka's fault. I think he's being fairly open and transparent and telling us what he knows when we ask about the situation. I think a lot of this, and I think back to all those weeks of uncertainty involving Kyle Tucker and the Astros, just comes down to the fact that the people who really know what's going on and know if this is normal or not are not being made available to talk about the situation. So the rest of us are, for the most part, just guessing. And so as for what I think, again, this is just a guess. I am fairly optimistic because of the fact that Tari is not being hidden. We are seeing him before the games. He's working out on the court. He's getting in a good sweat. He's being listed as questionable, not out. This is not like the stretch in February of last year prior to his surgery, where before they just leaked one day that he had surgery and was out for the year and had a 4-month recovery timeline before he could even resume basketball activities, that we were just waiting for the news to drop because he'd been shut down. No, Tari has not been shut down. He's doing physical activity. I don't think they would have him doing that if they were gravely concerned. And so just reading the context clues and the fact that they say the pain is subsiding, that he's getting close, I'm not nearly as concerned as I was this time a year ago. And you can sell me on the idea that a lot of this is just post-op standard soreness that just accompanies that type of major surgery, and maybe it's just a multi-year recovery process in much the same way it is for Steven Adams, even though the Adams injury is a ligament and this is a bone. Regardless, lower leg surgery is lower leg surgery. The larger point, Tari needs to get healthy, and while I understand the frustration from the fan base, I don't think the Rockets, I certainly don't think it's been mismanaged. I think they're being cautious and shutting him down until he's healthy. And with the team winning games in the interim, again, 5-2, I don't care who you play. That's a good 7-game stretch at any point in the NBA calendar for just about any team. You can't blame them for being cautious with him. I think behind the scenes, they're handling this well. And then in terms of what they say, other than initially listing it as, injury management, when in reality it was soreness, other than that small little thing, I think they're being as transparent as they reasonably can. And it's just a matter of the people who truly know more information are just not made available to us. Paolo, what are your thoughts on this whole, Tari Eason saga? Because I know certainly he's one of the most important players to the long-term championship viability of this team, but I also know he's one of your, personal favorite players as well.
Yeah, I think people can trust. So I think a lot of the time we are labeled as one of the podcasts that's more pro team or pro organization, right? But I think, and if you've been listening to us long enough, we had a pretty severe critique of how the Tari Eason injury was handled last season. We had basically like a 30 or 40 minute segment on it where we were pretty negative about it, and we were pretty critical of what happened and how not transparent it was last season and how that could potentially impact him long term.
By the way, let me jump in real quick. For Friday night's game against the Celtics, he's officially listed as doubtful. I think that's a change in response to some of the criticism as well, and I like that. And that I think what they're telling you is that you should assume he's out until he plays. They don't want to rule him out because obviously they're going to let him go through his pregame workouts. He's doing at least some activity at practices. Again, he's not in hiding. He has not been shut down. But to avoid this becoming a distraction, and that's where I think some of the initial confusion has come from the, injury management rather than soreness label, and in recent games being questionable, going through a pregame workout only to be ruled out a couple of minutes before game time. I think this is another positive change, listing him as doubtful. I don't necessarily think his condition has changed. I think it's more in response to the criticism and saying, look, we don't want this to hang over the team. We're giving him the time that he needs, and when he's ready, he's ready. Until he is, we're going to give him the time that he needs.
Yeah, and my position on it largely remains the same as it was last season. I tore my ACL, which obviously is a ligament, so it's probably different. But I was sore like a year and a half after the surgery. And I could do I could do everything else. I could play. Obviously, for me, it's football or soccer for you guys. But I was able to play. The only thing that changed was that the day after I played, it felt like it tightened up like crazy, and it felt like I couldn't move. Not necessarily, like, it was really tight, and it felt like I had just, I don't know, lifted like 500 kilos or whatever it was. Um, and so that's my experience from it. My only um qualm with it is I want whatever makes it so Tari Eason comes back 100% healthy. And I'm not too sold on and obviously I'm not a doctor, so I don't know if this is normal for what the type of injury that he had. I'm not too sold on see if he can go, and if he can go, he will go. Unless that's the prognostic for the rest of his career. Or unless that prognostic's not going to change or have impact in the long-term health of his lower leg. And so, to me, I'm typically like this in a lot of things in life. I'd rather have it be 100% than force it at 80%. But once again, I have no inside knowledge. I'm not a doctor. I don't even know what's going on with Tari himself. I do find a little bit of I guess comfort in the fact that Tari's mom on Twitter has said that she's not concerned. I think those were the words that she used. I think someone said, I mean, and I'm starting to worry about Tari Eason's leg or whatever it is, and she said that she wasn't concerned. And so, if she's not, I think that she'd know as much as anybody. So that helped me a little bit as well, because there's nobody out there that would be looking out for Tari's future from a big picture standpoint more than his own mother. So if he feels fine with it, I think it's probably fine. And yeah, the only thing I'd say is if he's not 100%, I would rather him not play than him play at 80 or 90%. And I will say about the doubtful designation, I was going to touch on it because it popped up as you were speaking. But I do agree that it feels safer, or feels better if that's the designation rather than questionable, because we over time kind of expect questionable players to play. And so I think probably is the correct way to go about it, and so people don't think that he's on the verge of coming back. Because it's usually tougher for someone to go from probable to available than it is to go to questionable, from questionable to available. Usually, if it's probable, it'll go to questionable right before the game or the day of the game, and then it'll be available. If it's questionable, sometimes just the day of the game, they change it around. I mean, I think Anthony Davis and LeBron James are permanently questionable for the last 2 years, and they play most games. So yeah, I do agree with them changing it to probable, to not
Doubtful.
probable to doubtful. Sorry, I said probable a lot of times. I meant doubtful every single one of those. I'm sorry. It's 1 a.m. here.
I know what you mean. And I'll point out that if Tari needs it, I don't think the schedule gets consistently difficult when you look ahead to what the Rockets have upcoming until the last 10 days of January. Starting the 22nd, you've got 2 games in a row against Cleveland. You've got the Celtics. You've got the Grizzlies. You've got a back-to-back in New York against the Knicks and the Nets. I know the Nets are terrible. It's back-to-back. You've got then 2 road games at Minnesota and Dallas. Those are the games where the schedule is consistently difficult. It's a little more difficult now than it has been, but there are also breather games in there. The weekend games against the Celtics and Lakers, they're difficult, but they are in Houston, and it's worth noting the Celtics will be on night 2 of a road back-to-back. Maybe that helps you. But then after that Tuesday, you play at Washington, the worst team in the league. You also have games in the middle of this month. I'm looking at the schedule against the Blazers, the Kings, the Pistons, who just lost Jaden Ivey. The schedule is not consistently difficult. So even if, there are some more difficult games, you have a couple of games against the Grizzlies in there that could be important for seeding. You've also got a back-to-back against the Nuggets and Kings. It's not that the Rockets are going to go on a long winning streak. that I expect them to, because I don't. But I also think there's enough, soft landing places in there that I don't expect them to go on a long losing streak either, even if there isn't Tari Eason. So because of that, if you need a couple more weeks to be super conservative and let whatever inflammation is built up die down, I think you can do that. And if you tread water, they're 22-11 now, and just, tread water at being, 10, 12 games above 500 before you get into this more difficult stretch leading into the trade deadline, I think that is completely fine. And as long as his leg is ultimately healthy in the long run, if anything, it might end up being a silver lining economically, and that it gives you an opportunity to extend him at a slightly friendlier figure this offseason. We'll see. Maybe Tari chooses to bet on himself given these factors and wait until after he has a healthier year 4, 2 years since the surgery. Obviously, that's for him to decide after the season. Priority one right now is just getting back. But in terms of the long haul, there could be potentially some benefits, which we've talked about in the past in terms of the team building. And that brings me to our final segment, my final resolution, which is about not just the micro of the here and now, what's coming up the next few games or weeks, but the bigger picture of team building. My big resolution for the Rockets in 2025, this is the year that before this year is up, and probably before this summer is up, they are going to have a perimeter 1A. And it doesn't have to come externally. There's still more than half of this season to go. So maybe Jalen Green, Amen Thompson, Cam Whitmore, one of those guys becomes much more consistent. But if it doesn't happen internally, I think we are at a point now, and even 2 months ago, I don't think the Rockets were fully there. But we are at a point now where both incentive and opportunity are in alignment. And that's typically what it takes for a big trade in the NBA to be worthwhile. I think, first and foremost, you need incentive. And in past years, the Rockets just haven't been close enough when it comes to the contending window for it to be worth taking the risk of dealing some young prospects before you fully know what their long-term value is going to be, to push your timetable forward the way it inevitably is when you acquire a veteran who's a little bit older and closer to, contractual uncertainty. The Rockets are 22-11 now, even with these clear flaws that we've discussed in this pod and in recent episodes. They have the second best defense in the league. It will not take a lot to get them from where they are now to a truly contending level. And so that's a form of incentive that wasn't there even a few months ago, when I think if you had asked us in, September prior to this season starting, we would have said it's possible a big deal comes in 2025, but the way this team is set up with lots of future assets, no big money on the books, they could push it into 2026 or 2027. No, they're close enough now to where it's worthwhile, and there is a cost to waiting. I think opportunity is not a lengthy visitor to the NBA. The new CBA can be tough to keep teams together. Injuries can happen. There's all sorts of things. You can't take for granted that you're going to be a title contender for 5, 10 plus years. You'd like to be, but if you're 22-11 as is, and you have a chance to get a lot better with a deal, that's pretty powerful incentive now that the baseline is substantially higher than it was even September 2024, let's say the third or entering the fourth quarter of 2024. So incentive is there. And then the other component is opportunity, because even if you have the incentive, well, do you have the assets? Well, Rockets definitely have the assets in terms of, promising young players, draft picks to make a deal work. But it also comes down to, are you desirable enough? Is the right player on the market that makes sense for what you need and makes sense for your organization, your city, to where all these things line up? That's why it's so tough to see a big deal come together. Well, there are two guys, I don't know if they're on the market literally right now, but it's pretty clear that they could be in the coming weeks or definitely months. And De'Aaron Fox and Devin Booker, teams that are going nowhere in a loaded Western Conference, below 500, have no clear avenues to improve. And I feel strongly that both of them will be available to the Rockets at a reasonable asset cost, and that the Rockets would not need to overpay their market value by an extreme amount or take a risk on them being unhappy. I think, with De'Aaron Fox on the player side, he's a Houston native. Houston's a better situation than Sacramento. The Rockets need a lead guard to pair with Alperen Şengün. The fit is clear. We've talked about it in previous pods. I'm sure we will again leading up to the trade deadline. We don't have to get into the particulars of that today, but I just think when you look at everything lining up, all the boxes are checked. When you look at Devin Booker and the Phoenix Suns, I don't know about Booker's interest in Houston specifically, but I know the Rockets' interest in Booker. That's been well chronicled. And more important, when it comes to the opportunity angle, the Rockets have all of Phoenix's future draft capital, or enough of it to where there would be a powerful incentive for the Suns to play ball with the Houston Rockets in this scenario. So when you look at the marriage of incentive and opportunity, the Rockets are incentivized, the opportunities are coming there on the market, and the Rockets are close enough now that one of these moves conceivably could, if not push them over the top, get them really freaking close. I think this is the year that it happens. Not guaranteeing it because, again, there's still enough time on the schedule. We saw how Jalen Green finished last year. Maybe something crazy like that happens again. Maybe something happens internally to where the calculus shifts. Maybe they go on a longer playoff run than we expect, and you don't need it. But I just think that one way or another, by the end of this year, when you consider how high the floor is, how high the baseline is at present, when you consider the opportunities that are emerging on the market, one way or another, by the end of 2025, I think the Rockets will have their perimeter 1A to pair with Alperen Şengün. That's my resolution for this team. That's what I think they need to do, and I ultimately think it's what they will do. I don't know if it'll happen by the trade deadline. My gut tells me that this offseason is more realistic. As we talked about in the past, teams tend to be much more willing to make bigger deals, think bigger picture in the offseason. But in terms of resolutions, I'm more convinced than ever that calendar year 2025 at some point is the year. Paolo, what are your thoughts on that as the timeline? And are there any other resolutions you'd like to throw out before we wrap up the pod?
Yeah, I think as far as the trade for a star, I'm completely with you. I mean, if you recall on a previous pod, I said that the most likely scenario was that we traded for someone. So typically in the NBA, you should bet on the status quo like 70% of the time. I'm saying I'll give it higher than 2-1 odds that the Rockets do make a trade for a star. As you said, there's guys that perfectly fit both age-wise, contract situation-wise, their team situation-wise, and position-wise, which is the most important for what the Rockets need. When Devin Booker and De'Aaron Fox, and there's other guys that could become available. I'm not gonna, say it too early, but the Wolves are in a tough spot. Who knows? They very quickly within the Anthony Edwards tenure as a player went all in, and there's nothing they can do to improve the team. I mean, I also think even if there is a Jalen leap, that you can still justify a trade like that. It's just probably not for Devin Booker, although he could play with the shooting guard. He is playing with the shooting guard right now. He has improved that as a lead playmaker for De'Aaron Fox, just because I guess my other hot take is that I find it very tough to have Fred VanVleet be the starting point guard for another season after this one, even this one until the end. It's just, listen, Rufflestone was incredibly smart in giving him a 2-year contract at an overpay versus a longer deal on a lower average annual value, just because undersized guards, as greedy as they might be, as jump shot reliant as Fred VanVleet might be, and that being, some of the last stuff to go athleticism wise, it's just, you can't make a bet. Like, the Rockets have gotten to a point that they're good enough to that they can afford to be giving up as much as they are by playing Fred VanVleet. I think he's probably worse than Jalen Green right now. And I'm sorry that might be a hot take, but I truly think he is. And what that means is that you can still trade for one of the stars, even if Jalen has a blossoming year end to some extent. But I kind of, before I get into it, I only have one New Year's resolution for the Rockets. I want to touch on two things before I get to that. And one of them is a question that I want to fire back to you. But the first one is, it's real. These last few games, like the last 7 games, proved to me that we are really a contender adjacent type team. We're not the Thunder, we're not the Celtics, we're not the Cavs, but we are right below. Listen, there's a lot of things that go into what a great team is, right? Taking care of business against the Pelicans, against the Raptors, against the Hornets, and against the Pelicans again in the ways that we did. Like these weren't necessarily, close games. I guess the Raptors one looks closer because we kind of let go of the rope a little bit too early and it got closer.
Yeah.
But these were not close games. And, good teams don't slip up against terrible competition, and we didn't. And we might have lost against the Wolves. We might have lost against the Heat, but we dominated those games. We deserve to lose. We deserve to win those games. Massive fourth quarter collapse. It counts as an L. There's no silver linings on for a contender, but it further shows me that we are this good. We're not. It's not shot clock. It's not. I guess it's not non-sustainable effort. We play like we didn't have Amen Thompson against the Mavericks. Granted, they didn't have Luka, but we didn't have Amen Thompson. We didn't have Tari Eason, who are massive parts of our game. Jalen Green didn't have an outstanding game. Fred VanVleet had an awful game. We won anyways. It didn't matter. And so, this to say that I think we're truly here. We're truly arrived. And listen, us being this good while shooting this poorly from three makes me think that we're here for the long run, unless for the next half decade at the very least, unless some crazy injuries happen or something wild like what happened with Cam Whitmore and the Grizzlies, and even them have been coming back now that Ja is playing and they have their entire team together. Sorry for the rant. My question back to you is, if it's De'Aaron Fox or Dylan Brooks, it more than likely doesn't mean going all in from the perspective of spending, basically every asset, doing a Timberwolves type deal, right?
De'Aaron Fox or Devin Booker, right?
Who did I say?
You said Dylan Brooks.
You did. I
assume you meant Devin Booker.
That's my bad. I meant Devin Booker or De'Aaron Fox. I'm sorry for confusing name. I guess I'm the oldest 23-year-old in the world. What I wanted to ask is, if it's Devin Booker or De'Aaron Fox, it likely means that we're not going to be giving up, the entire treasure chest of assets. There's even arguments that could be made that if we gave up some more key players, that we could even get both and still have, Sengun and Amen Thompson, I guess. My question is, where are you in regards to a situation where maybe you can do what the Timberwolves did? You hold on to, let's call it Sengun and the men, but you give up, you give up Reed, you give up Cam Whitmore, you give up Kalen, you give up all of the Suns picks, all of the Rockets' own picks that they do still own. If you can get Booker and another guy, imagine I can get Booker and KD. Are you ready to pull that trigger, or would you rather half measure it and go for a young star and keep building this thing more sustainably versus, just, I think probably if you did make a trade for Booker and KD, I think it'd probably jump straight into, the forefront of that tier above us. But how do you feel about the two scenarios? If an opportunity arises, which one would you go for?
I'll be honest, I would rather just Devin Booker. Now, that's not to say I'm closed off to like a super team scenario where it's Booker and KD, because if the alternative is to not get Booker or someone in that tier, then yeah, upgrading the Jalen Green spot or the Fred VanVleet spot, whatever you want to call it, to a proven 1A perimeter star, that's worthwhile. But I would rather do it without compromising the sustainability and the formula that's already proven to have this really high floor, because I agree with you. There's nothing in these games, even the ones the Rockets lost on night 2 of back-to-back, to play as well as they did against Minnesota. They looked like they belonged against a Timberwolves team that was playing really hard and has been close to its best over the last week or so. Even though they've gotten off to a bad start, I think we all know that's a really talented roster. Probably a little bit worse with losing Cat for Julius Randle, but not terribly worse by any stretch. I think what stands out to me about this year's Rockets above everything else, they belong. There are very few moments, very few games where they look outclassed. And so because of that, my strong preference would be to upgrade one of the clear deficiencies without dramatically changing the formula of this team and the sustainability, because having guys like Cam Whitmore and eventually Reed Shepherd to plug and play when there's an injury like what's happened recently with Tari. Why haven't the Rockets suffered? In large part, it's because you've had Cam Whitmore waiting in the wings, and he's stepped into many of those vacated minutes. Jason Tate as well. Having guys further down the roster, the depth, especially in a sport that has 82 games, it has all these back-to-backs, it's really important. So my preference with the baseline as high as it is would be to get the young star without going all the way in. Now, with that said, if it's a scenario where, Booker wants to go with KD and you can only get both or none, and there's not an alternative like De'Aaron Fox or someone else that can fill that role, then again, it's a sliding scale. I'm not saying I'm totally closed off to, the more all in, try and jump immediately to the Thunder Celtics tier. But my preference, I've seen enough and I believe enough in Rafael Stone, Patrick Rashida, Eli Whitus, what that front office is doing, the sustainability, the picks they have moving forward, the young players, the assets. I would rather improve one of the clear deficiencies and leave a pipeline for further growth moving forward to keep this thing viable for 5, 10 plus years. That's my preference.
All right, I'm largely with you. I think one of the most common mistakes of the modern NBA is teams are so eager to become a super team that they forget that a lot of you don't really out-talent. I think the last team that was good enough to out-talent their way into a championship was the Nets, and they fell apart because of injuries.
Yeah.
Because besides that, fit matters a lot, and I do think that KD is a great fit here, as would be Devin Booker. But there's always struggles that you can only, that you don't see coming, and there's always needs that a team has, player-wise, that you only really notice once you're playing the games. And so, because of that, I'm really against trades that leave you completely barren of assets. And so, I would much rather have one star and some leeway, even if it's not enough to get a third star, but it's enough to get a couple of really good role players, to get, for Rockets reference, to get your Robert Covington, for example. When the Rockets were in the position to get Robert Covington, they have to give up Clint Capella because they didn't have the assets to get Robert Covington in any other way. And so the equivalent of that right now would be, well, yes, you keep Şengün and you keep Amen Thompson and you bring those two guys in, but all of a sudden, if you want to make a trade, the only guy that has some value that you have left is Dillon Brooks. And you're like, well, now if I want to go get a guy that fits better, I have to give up Dillon Brooks. And I kind of need Dillon Brooks. And he is a key part of the team, just like Capella was in the Cape Southern years. And so, just moral of the story, I'll much rather just take it incrementally, especially because there's an argument to be made that just getting Devin Booker or just getting De'Aaron Fox will get us to that tier.
Exactly.
And what KD will take us over those other teams is probably not worth sacrificing the long haul, because to win a championship in the NBA is not really just about being the best team. I'd rather be an A-level team for 6, and this is something that I've only recently started leaning towards. I used to be more about being all in or bottoming out. I'd rather be an A team. Well, let me put a caveat in there. As long as there's no dynasty, as long as there's no Warriors, there's no Chiefs, there's no the Astros of past years, I'd rather be an A team for 6 years than be an A plus team for 2 years and then have to completely rebuild again. Because within the current landscape of the NBA, that there aren't any super teams, you need to be really good, but you need to be really good continually because things happen. Listen, the Sixers have been really good for a really long time. They can make it work because indeed there's things in the playoffs or is injured by the time they get there. And so you need everything to align in order for it to result in a championship. And so within that logic, that would be an A for 6 years. And, depending on what happens, maybe a 18 star becomes available and you make a super team that way for a cheaper price. But I will just close it off with my other resolution, which is, man, we've been really good at developing young players as far as their defense goes. Everybody has improved massively, and it's not just a system thing. It's a one-on-one defense thing. It's a communication thing. Like, you watch some of these, mic'd up moments, and you watch some of these things that get picked up by the cameras courtside, And even Jalen Green has become a tremendous communicator on defense. And you cannot tell me that if you went to a team like, I don't know, the Pistons or worse franchise without Ime Udoka and the guys, that you would make that leap, because Jalen is a scoring guard, right? Jalen becoming a really good communicator on defense and a really, active communicator on defense is not something you expect out of your scoring guard, but it's something that helps. And when earlier in the review, we talked about them not communicating on defense being a massive problem. And so there's a lot of things that you don't really show up in the tape or don't really show up in the stat sheet that Rockets have been really good at developing. What they've not been really good at developing whatsoever is shooting. Like there's been nobody that has come onto this team and has been better at shooting than they were expected to be. And for most of the guys, they haven't been as good at shooting as they were expected to be, considering their draft profile. Jordan Green has underperformed massively. Javari has underperformed slightly, although it has come back to earth a little bit. Tari Eason probably the closest one to what you expected. Alperen Sengun, it looked like he was developing it. It's back to terrible, 22%, something of the sort. Thompson looks like he's developing it, but he's really not a shooter.
Ways
to go. Reed Shepard, I'm not gonna. It's too early to tell, but it's not like it never happens to us. What happens to the other teams where a guy comes in and he's instantly efficient? Like we don't get it at all in the next time. Even Reed Shepard, who was supposed to be awesome off the get go, just a terrific shooter. No, Jabari Smith, nope. Doesn't happen to us. My New Year's resolution is: can we? And no Ben. It's not. Is it Ben Johnson or am I confusing?
Ben Sullivan.
Ben Sullivan. Ben Johnson's the Detroit. Sorry, Ben Sullivan. It was supposed to be our shooting guru. Listen, I don't know. Maybe we're cursed. My resolution is: can we please get better at teaching guys how to shoot? It would help tremendously. Thank you very much. Have a good year.
Same to you. And I will say, on a positive note, to wrap up the pod, Cam Whitmore, his form looks a lot better. I mean, obviously, we're all a prisoner to results in the moment, but his mechanics look a lot cleaner. Now, you can question how much is the Rockets versus how much is, the G League staff. I guess that's a distinction you can try and make, but I do think there's been clear growth. And I think since he's come back, he's shooting right at about 40% from three. So knock on wood, hopefully that continues and maybe he ends up being the shooter that we wanted to develop internally. Because to circle back to the point on team building, as we close this out, I'm in complete agreement with you that an A-level team for 6 years is better than an A+ for 2 or 3, especially in the modern NBA, where the new CBA is making it very difficult to keep these super teams together. And so when you look at the competition, it makes even more sense to go for the longer window, to give yourself the most bites at the apple, if you will. But then the one argument that I don't like, and we see this more with De'Aaron Fox, because it's natural to, make these comparisons of Alperen Sengun to Domantas Sabonis and say, well, if the Kings couldn't get over the hump with that duo, how could the Rockets? And I just firmly reject that, because the baseline of this team, when you look at Amen Thompson, Tari Eason, Cam Whitmore, the depth of options that they have up and down this roster, no, you would not have to give close to all of them up to bring in a guy like De'Aaron Fox. There's upward mobility in a way that a franchise like the Kings has never had, especially when you combine it with Ime Udoka and how talented this defense is, the collective buy-in, the culture, then that number 2 in the league pretty much the entire year. It's just an apples to oranges comparison when you look at what Fox has done with Domantas Sabonis the last few years with the now fired Mike Brown and the Kings. I just don't like that comparison at all. Don't want to get too in the weeds on that, because we'll talk more De'Aaron Fox in the weeks leading up to the trade deadline. Stay tuned. Just using that as an opportunity to make a more general observation, which is that most of the comparisons that you're seeing, it's De'Aaron Fox, if he can't get the Kings over the hump, or if the Suns are struggling like this, is Devin Booker worth it? It's always, or usually, an apples to oranges comparison when you look at the advantages the Rockets have in place. The surrounding infrastructure is really, really good, even with clear flaws that we know they need to upgrade with hopefully that perimeter 1A. But up and down the roster, there's a lot to like here. And so because of that, I tend to be of the belief that, upgrade the deficiency and lean on the culture, the collective buy-in, what you've already built, and use that to hopefully get you over the hump and give you a longer, more sustainable window moving forward. Anyway, that's where we'll wrap things for today. We'll have more specific talk about trade targets in the coming weeks as far as any big name possibilities, smaller ones. The rumors tend to pick up more in the last couple of weeks leading up to the deadline, which again, this year is Thursday, February 6th. So we'll talk more about that as January progresses. And, we'll learn a little bit more, I think, in the days ahead about how close or not close Tari Eason is to returning, because perhaps that influences what they look for or need at the deadline as well when we look at making the current version of the Rockets more competitive in the playoffs, which is where I think we agree that barring some sort of, radical downturn in their play or catastrophic injury is where they're bound. This is a very good basketball team, and what we've seen over the recently completed holidays only confirms what I think is the most important takeaway from really this past month or so of Houston Rockets basketball. They belong. That hot start to the year was not a fluke. They are showing you with each passing game that they are legitimate. And again, as you mentioned, they're doing this with 3-point shooting that's second to last in the league. Just imagine if that ever comes around. I know it feels like we've said that for a while, but God, even last year they weren't this bad. So even a little bit of upward mobility in the shooting can offset a little bit of slippage or injuries somewhere else. Anyway, on that optimistic note, that's where we will leave things until our next episode. And if you want more content before then, the best place to get that is online. You can follow me on Twitter or X at Ben Dubose, Paolo at Paolo Alves NBA, and the show at The Logger Line, where if you go to the Logger Line's page, you can find our link tree. That's got links to all our distribution partners, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you'd be kind enough to subscribe, leave a positive review at your location of choice. Obviously, we would appreciate that. And also on that same link tree, you've got links to friends, sponsors, partners of the program, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Carback Brewing, Sports Talk 790. Hit up those links and you can enjoy their content as well. So with those plugs complete, we'll adjourn for tonight. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line. Go Rockets.